right. Big fan of this guest. I mentioned to her off air. I'm going to bring it over here. She is a Democratic strategist and a Fox News contributor and the host of the Leslie Marshall Show. You can check her out on lesliemarshallshow.com. And that is Leslie Marshall. Leslie, Mike Leon, Nick Savary, thank you so much for hopping on the podcast with us.
Thank you for having me, guys, and for dealing with my crazy schedule. We've rescheduled a few times, and I'm really not that flaky, so I apologize. I'm glad to be here.
Leslie, no worries. I hope you enjoyed your brother's wedding, I believe it was in Hawaii.
Yes,
before,
in Hawaii.
If you saw the viral videos of some of these tidal waves taking out a wedding, good thing that wedding happened weeks ago. I wanted to get your take on something real quick that as we're recording this just kind of broke. There's a deal that has been going on for months. And again, a deal, I'm using air quotes for those of us watching on YouTube, that's led by Republican Senator Susan Collins and Democratic Senator Joe Manchin about, the Electoral Count Act. And I'm not sure if you heard about this, but there's talks right now. The bill's co-sponsored by 9 Republicans, 7 Democrats. And there's a bunch in the proposal about key provisions intended to promote an orderly transition of presidential power. It would make it harder for members of Congress to attempt to overturn an election by increasing the number of House and Senate members required to raise an objection. I want to get some of your takeaways on this because we're seeing some bipartisan nature legislation potentially, depending on how it votes in the Senate and House, that could stop what we're seeing play out with the January 6th committee and what happened back in 2021. So give me some of your takeaways on just hearing about this that came down as we're recording this.
Well, a few things. Yes, I know about it. It's one of the few, as of late, if only things I agree with Joe Manchin on. And in addition to that, it's probably, other than gun control legislation and infrastructure, I don't think most people are going to be affected personally in their households by a bipartisan forthcoming semiconductor piece of legislation. But this piece of legislation is essential. This piece of legislation would impact and affect each and every American. I think what it shows is, for all the poo-pooing on the right about the January 6th committee, is that information that was watched or listened to by our elected officials, even Republican elected officials, shows that perhaps it was much worse than they thought. Perhaps we came much closer to losing our democracy. And I think also they saw that, Mike Pence didn't just do the right thing. There are a number of things there. One, he did make a phone call and kind of looked at her. Are there any loopholes here? Is this so black and white? Are there gray areas? Can I get around this? And what if he had not done the right thing? I think it's the what ifs, for all of the bravado, by the right, especially those who, still like Lindsey Graham, seem to still be kissing the butt of the former president. There are those that are concerned that their party is being hijacked. I think they're also knowing there's an announcement coming by Donald Trump if he's going to run again. And many of us know that on the Hill behind closed doors, the majority of Republicans don't want him to run, don't want him to be the nominee, don't want him to be president again, are horrified about what happened by January 6th, but they don't want to lose their jobs and their constituencies. So they don't say that. They shut their mouth. They're spineless when they've got a microphone and a camera in front of them. So I think it's very significant that you have so many Republicans on this, and that this is happening, and the timing of this, as today will be concluding, or tomorrow, will be concluding the January 6th committee's findings.
Well, let's transition to that because you fed perfectly into the segue for the next question. Up to this point, since we're recording before the 2 key witnesses that will testify tomorrow in front of the committee, they've already testified, obviously, with depositions that were recorded. Give me some of your takeaways so far in these 7 hearings. We've had a couple different people on from different outlets that are covering this, former officials that have worked in different administrations. But what are some of your major takeaways right now as you see this timeline starting to unfold, as you're seeing more pieces of evidence that are introduced into former President Trump's actions that day, which is the focus of the next hearing? What are some DOJ as well, kind of sitting on their hands with a few things and having a bunch of legal scholars up in arms? What are some of your takeaways as to everything that's happened so far with the committee?
I have so many takeaways from first, why does the Department of Justice need to have the January 6th committee doing their research for them, to this was essential. And I say this was essential because, and I know some people roll their eyes, laugh, or, think that, totally will outright disagree with me on this. This committee was not there to help Democrats lose less seats in the midterms in November. And I know many people think that, but certainly Adam Kinzinger, Liz Cheney, they are not, caring about, they're still voting with their party, on the side. They're caring about truth, and the truth be put forth, and that the American people know the truth. And I think the American people need to know the truth, and I am one of those American people, because what these hearings did, I feel, is almost like, Darwin's missing link. These showed the missing link. These showed the loopholes. These showed what we didn't see on camera. This showed the complete story rather than just a soundbite. This put everything into context, and I think what it did show, polls show this, that we were very close to losing our democracy. This was certainly not tourism. There were certainly weapons. I think very, very powerful when you have people that worked in the Trump White House, were in the room, and shared their first, hand eyewitness account of what was happening and what he was doing, or more so what he was not doing. I think a former Proud Boy sitting there and talking about the intent of this group, which he said is clearly a militia, that he heard denying the Holocaust, talking about, weapons. Look, I'm not trying to liken the Proud Boys to the Taliban, but what happened with the Taliban, right? What happened with the Taliban? They're a small group of thugs with weapons who overthrew a government and now control a country. That could have happened here. I'm not saying, again, they're the Taliban or like the Taliban, but they and some others are a group of thugs who had weapons, who were going to, try and put their guy in power. And then what happens when they don't like their guy anymore? They overthrow him and they take over the power. That could put us on par with a third world nation that we've seen happen in real time in this day and age, in our lifetime, not in our history books. Also, I think just looking at the polls, people said, "Oh, I'm not going to watch it." 2/3 of people aren't going to watch it. And then we saw the numbers come out after the first airing of this committee, of these hearings. And what did we see? That's not true. Kind of reminds me of people that say, "I'm never going to watch you on TV again." And for months, they're still talking about my appearances on TV. So obviously they're still watching me on TV again. And in addition to that, you're also seeing some movement when you look at the polls, a lot of movement when it comes to pull away from Donald Trump, and in some races pulling away from more extreme Trump-backed candidates. So I think a lot has come out of it. I know for me as a voter and an American, and I think as polls are showing, for a lot of Americans out there. Obviously, there are people who hate Trump, and it didn't matter what came out in these, they're not going to vote for him, and they're going to vote, for a Democrat. They're going to vote for Joe Biden again. And there are those that are going to vote for Donald Trump. It really doesn't matter. Like he said, if he went out on Madison Avenue and shot somebody, right? But I think there are those that think like a Susan Collins Republican, that, I don't want this happening to my party or my country again.
Leslie, it's okay. You don't have to necessarily draw the conclusion between the Taliban and the Proud Boys. I'll do it. They seem Taliban adjacent. Right. I can't speak for you both, but yeah, as a tourist myself, I've never had to go through the windows of a building. I usually go through the door and usually don't have a reason to be maced. Correct. On the subject of candidates, thinking about midterms, Leslie, over the last recently last month or so, we've seen Supreme Court decisions coming down as it relates to abortion rights and gun rights. As a political strategist, just with candidates, with Democrat candidates right now, what seems to be the rallying cry? Because prior to these decisions, a lot of data was telling us that this seemed to be leaning toward Republicans regaining the House, or at least, securing potentially more seats in the Senate. But just what's your temperature taking, from the recent decisions and what seems to be coming up on the campaigns now for Democrats?
I'm very surprised as a woman and a Democrat that overturning Roe v. Wade wouldn't have had more outcry. I'm hoping and praying that I will see a difference in the midterms. I have a lot to say in this, and I don't want to take your entire life on this. So
please do so. I'm here for this.
Okay. Historically, and now is no exception. James Carville in 92 was right. It's the economy stupid. It still is. And it doesn't matter if you're a Democrat or Republican. What Americans feel and what Americans perceive versus reality is what they base their votes on. So even though gas prices are coming down, even though we're seeing strong labor reports and, the job market is stronger and unemployment is still at an all-time low, what they're seeing is, inflation is still 9.1%. And they're seeing headlines, that a recession is coming, inflation is high, gas prices still aren't low enough. I'm still getting my Amazon Prime in 2 days, instead of 1. So what I say, to the campaigns that I work on is you have to impress upon these people how it affects their lives and the positives, because everybody talks about the liberal media. Well, it's interesting. If it really was the liberal media, Americans wouldn't feel doom and gloom and that a recession is coming and that, oh God, inflation and Joe Biden's ratings wouldn't be what they are. And I'm not blaming the media, but I'm saying if it truly were the liberal media, then this would be, these numbers, would not be out there. And of course, you're going to blame the party in power. We all blame the party in power. It doesn't matter if it's my party, or another party. But you can't just go on issues when you're in border states and immigration matters more to them than Roe v. Wade, right? In places like Uvalde, in places like Buffalo, gun control has jumped so much because of the personal experience and the personal loss. So you really can't just come up with a one size fits all. You have to look at each district, each state. Now, in states where you have women that are pro-choice, they may vote Republican, they're not Trump Republicans, well, then you want to hammer that Roe v. Wade being overturned, home. But the economy is still number one. And it's not just number one. It's almost like 1 through 10 when you compare that to Roe v. Wade, even among Democrats. So, yes. What's happening with guns and what Republicans are not willing to do with guns and what's happening in red states or states that are controlled by Republicans with guns and regarding abortion is just mind blowing. It's almost unbelievable that this is truly happening. I sometimes am. Are you kidding me? You want to force a 10-year-old victim of rape to have their rapist baby? I can't even, being that I've been raped, being that I've given birth and not to a rapist child, I can't even imagine as a grown woman. I've lived with that as a grown woman, how difficult it is to give birth, what that does to you physically, mentally, and emotionally. I cannot imagine. And knowing people that have given children up for adoption, I just can't even fathom. But I digress. Back to it. They've got to. Republicans are doing very, very well with messaging. If you notice, they get right after Uvalde, they get right back on immigration, right? And so, Republicans have a lot of ammunition against Democrats when it comes to the economy and immigration, and Democrats have to do better. And talking about not having Joe Biden run in 2024 is not the winning strategy. Looking at the midterms, how do you get more people out to vote? Because historically, Republicans come out in much higher numbers than Democrats for the midterms. I didn't think that Roe v. Wade was going to keep the House for Democrats. Seeing falling gas prices, a lot's going to have to happen. Between now and November is a blink of an eye or a lifetime, depending on how you look at it. But a lot would have to happen for Democrats to be able to retain the House. I do think they'll be able to retain the Senate. But we don't live in a fantasy world. I mean, this is reality, and the numbers are real, and the voters' sentiments are real. And what I'm hearing is, and you also have to remember, the most outrage are typically from women in states like mine, California, that aren't going to lose their rights. The fear is, look, I know in my own circles, personally, and Democratic circles, and I have tons of friends that aren't Democrats, and I even have friends that like Trump. They're not the cray-cray like Trump people, but they, do like Trump for other reasons. So this is not, I sit down in my living room with just Democratic, pro-choice women, and we talk about how can we help people get abortions. But when I have conversations with women, before this happened, I myself did not believe the Supreme Court would ever do this. I really didn't. I really didn't. And a lot of people I know felt that way. And I think there's some of that same denial when it comes to same-sex marriage, which we're seeing is coming up on the horizon pretty quick. And I'm not sure if they're going to wake up to the fact that they could do that with interracial relationships, with contraception, with traveling out of state to get an abortion. You know what I mean? So I think, sadly, we are a reactive votership in the United States, and Democrats especially, and not a proactive and preventative votership. And the other thing is, stop the damn marching, start writing checks and voting. We're incredible at marching, but if all those people that march don't come out to vote, and we know by the numbers they don't, it doesn't make, can I say damn? I just did a damn bit of difference.
Leslie, sounds like you've been listening to the show because
I shake my head in like prayer hands here, because Mike and I in a recent episode talked about young voters. We talked about what polling data is telling us, and
Hispanics.
And it's this conversation that keeps coming up about social media activism. There's not a question here, sorry, but I did have to share with the strategist here. But social media activism does make a difference. Even money. I mean, I think about Jamie Harrison's campaign recently, but voting. That's if for listeners, if you get anything else here with a strategist on our panel, get out and vote.
I mean, I love AOC and I understand what they're trying to do, but getting arrested on the steps, of the Capitol, or, in the middle of a street in DC, not doing anything. And you guys make the laws. You have the power. Go in and do your job, make the laws and use your power, and then use your power in the states where women are going to lose those rights to pump money into elections where it's possible to keep a seat blue or flip a seat blue and get people out to vote.
Well, it seems to be easier to get arrested like Cori Bush than it is to actually legislate, to actually do your job and support your district. That's always been something I've never understood about our newer Democrats.
Yesterday I was on a podcast, and Trey Gowdy was on the podcast with me, and I can't believe that yesterday I think I agreed with him twice, and in one podcast, and I had not been drinking, and I told him he said actually that when he was in Congress, it was about how you voted, but now it's about how many likes you have on TikTok.
Yep. That is very well said. We've also had a chief of staff kind of echo something similar. Adam Kinzinger's chief of staff was on recently. You fed into a bunch there. I wanted to follow up on something because last year around this time, the Supreme Court levied, and I believe in 3 landmark rulings, one with the college athletics and then another one with, I forget the other 2 rulings, but this summer to remember for the Supreme Court, as I'm tagging it that, and if a sponsor wants to pay for that, happily we'll accept that money. The Supreme Court ruled on Roe v. Wade, sending abortion rights back to the states. There was that controversial New York gun case that they ruled on. They rendered the EPA basically, and other federal agencies, regardless of what they stand for, see you later. You have no authority to do anything anymore. Then they threw some bones with the Remain in Mexico policy to the Biden administration. What do you make of the makeup of the Supreme Court's rulings over this last 3 to 4 months? I know you touched a little bit, and thank you for sharing that personal story. I'm sorry that happened to you, Leslie, about Roe v. Wade. But what do you make of some of the other rulings in some of these cases, some that affect climate, gun control, immigration? Like you said, they've been touching on a bunch of different things that will affect either legislatively, in the fall, whenever the makeup of what the House and Senate look like. They're going to make, for a lot of different things that are going to happen legislatively over the next 6 to 12 months, maybe even up until 2024. What do you make of some of these Supreme Court rulings that have come down over the last couple of months?
Well, I mean, they're terrible, and they're just laying the groundwork for a nation. And I look, I'm a centrist moderate Democrat, so I don't say this as, quote, a progressive. But I am progressive in the sense I used to love when Barack Obama said, you put the car in drive, not in reverse, and D for Democrat, R for Republican. But I mean, I have never in my life, I'm not that old, but maybe I am. I've never in my life seen a court that is so blatantly not truly acting in a judicial manner solely, but rather showing the political party they're pandering to. I just have never in my life. There is a reason Lady Justice is blindfolded. And they have taken the blindfold off. I mean, whether it's some of the comments Clarence Thomas has made stopping short of one privacy provision, that has been passed tied to privacy provision that the Supreme Court ruled with regard to something that would affect him, which is interracial marriage. I'm in interracial marriage. I'm married to an Indian guy, brown guy. So, could you be more blatantly obvious, which is basically like, you don't get rights, you don't get rights, you don't get, oh yeah, but don't touch mine. And then his wife and the connections, Ginny Thomas, and her support of not just Trump, of January 6th. And, we still don't know everything there. I'm not sure we ever will. When people talk about pack the court, people talk about, Democrats, crying and being snowflakes, but there are realities and facts. And the fact is, there were 9 Supreme Court justices since 1869, but those 9 Supreme Court justices are based on districts, House seats, population, which certainly has changed and grown since 1869. And, in the United States, don't we want that court to be a proper representation of the nation that it makes rulings at the highest court of the land based on? And when I say that, are they judges that are appointed, or are they elected officials? Because I feel like they're acting like the latter with these rulings. So when you see other countries moving forward, even Catholic countries with regard to abortion, Poland, Ireland, just 2 examples, it boggles my mind. People used to talk about Handmaid's Tale, and I like that show, but I used to, come on, folks. But aren't we, in a sense, becoming a country that is just, it's a red state or a blue state? And if you live in a red state, you can't get an abortion. But this isn't about just giving power to the states. I don't care how many times anybody says it, they're lying. This is about stopping abortions, which you really won't stop. I mean, before Roe v. Wade, there were abortions. There were just a lot more deaths and not safe abortions, especially if they're trying to touch upon women traveling or being able to order the birth control pill from another state or out of country, or just at your own pharmacy in that state. And what they're doing with physicians, we've just seen horrific things happen in the past weeks. Women bleeding, women having to carry a dead fetus inside them when they've miscarried because the doctor can't legally perform a D&C to extract a dead fetus based on the state's law. This is 2022. So are they going to take away my right to vote? Are they a Native American's going to lose all the rights that they've had? Are we going to go back to internment camps like in World War? How far does this go? I really don't know how far this goes. So the rulings have all, to me, been very political. It is not supposed to be a political court. I'm sad for my children and my children's children if things don't change. I'm sad for our country. And we're a leader in the world. And I don't think we're going to be a leader in the world. If people talk about leading from behind, well, if you're going backwards, who wants to follow you?
Awkward transition, but appropriate. When we think about, it's funny. We've had so many folks that have come on, legal minds, strategists, that sometimes apologizing for being doom and gloom. And the funny thing is, we've had it for the past year. We've had folks on that said, like, look out for the court. Like, these things are coming. And, I'd like to know what their thoughts on the lottery are nowadays. But, when we think about leading from behind, it's inevitable. We have to think about, most recently, President Biden's trip to Saudi Arabia. We think, you mentioned just a moment ago about a country that is known for what seems inhumane practices. Yeah. I think of that recent trip and the recent meeting with the Crown Prince. Just from your vantage point, how would you assess that trip? What is it doing from a foreign policy standpoint? Would you say, as a strategist, like that seemed like a bad look between fist bump and just meeting with the crown prince?
Yeah, I know people really harped on that, but I have to agree with the foreign head of foreign ministry in Saudi Arabia on this, which is, people aren't looking at what really happened at the meeting. It's not, that I had a boss once that told me, it was about a coworker, he's a doily guy. And I said, what do you mean by that? And he goes, well, you go into a room, right? And there's going to be a wedding, and there's a huge wedding cake. It's 5-6 tiers. It's beautiful. And then, you always got one guy that goes, the doily's crooked. The thing the Kate sits on, the little white paper lace doily, right? And I was like, yeah. And he's like, don't be a doily guy. He's a doily guy. We were talking about, and I never forget that. I never forget that imagery. And I really felt the fist bump was the doily, and that, people weren't concentrating a lot. Look, Joe Biden set himself up. He said, I'm not going to shake his hand. You guys know, because you broadcast and you have guests, I've interviewed horrendous people, Holocaust deniers, Grand Wizard KKK, white Aryan resistance leaders, and I'm half Jewish. I mean neo-Nazis. I chose to treat them with the same respect I would treat anybody I agree with or like, because they're a guest in my house, if you will, right? When they're on the Leslie Marshall Show, they're a guest in my house. Well, when you go to another nation, because people always get bent out of shape when people bow or they do that. When you are in another nation, you have to follow the rules, regulations, and guidelines. It's the reason that when I, are in certain places, in Israel, if you're near holy sites, I have to cover my shoulders and my knees, right? That's it, right? You have to cover your head in some Muslim countries, right? If I'm in certain places, Saudi Arabia, I got to cover everything but the eyes. Been there, done that, and I do it because I am a guest in their house. Presidents, the United States president, or any president, prime minister, king, queen, diplomat have protocol and diplomacy. We have always sadly talked out of both sides of our mouth. On one side, it's like, oh, the terrible human rights abuses, North Korea, China, Russia, Saudi Arabia. But on the other side, it's like, can you guys put more Coca-Cola factories over there? Because that would benefit us financially. Can we come up with this trade deal? So we know that we need these people in partnership. We need these people, when it comes to, trade, and when it comes to, we want them to buy our stuff. And there's things that we have from them that we need and that we want to buy. I don't think it was a successful trip because the president didn't walk away with what he wanted with regard to oil. The fist bump was a distraction, but he had to do something. Some people said it might have been better if he had just shaken his hand, but he couldn't because he had already put that out there. He wasn't going to do that. What's more important is what, he says, and what White House sources say is that he's, looked him in the eye, and, when he said, I had nothing to do with Khashoggi's death, and I didn't, call for that. And he said, I don't believe you. I believe that you did, and of course, Saudi Arabia sources and press say he didn't say that at all. And I'm thinking, what happened to the America I knew that actually believed, American journalists, our own White House, as opposed to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia's press people, and our president, versus the King or Prince of Saudi Arabia. So I don't think it was very successful. But I do think it continued to solidify a relationship, and we do have a relationship with Saudi Arabia. I also think, though, the big win for Joe Biden, fists aside, was Israel, not Saudi Arabia. It was the things he said regarding Israel. It was the mentions he made regarding Pakistan, and showing Israel and the world on a world stage that we are still strong allies. And we've got their back. And I say that because there are a lot of people on the right that would try to infer otherwise with not only Joe Biden, but anybody in my party and leadership.
You can check out the Leslie Marshall Show on lesliemarshallshow.com. I believe it's also available via podcast format. So wherever you get your podcast, she's a Democratic strategist and a Fox News contributor. Check her out across a multitude of the Fox shows. Leslie, thank you so much for hopping on the podcast tonight. Truly appreciate it. Continued success to you, and stay safe.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, guys. I appreciate you having me.